we're going to look at Calvinistic manipulation. 2 of these slides. I know these slides are busy and they're not super fun, maybe. Well, I think they are. But they're very helpful, and you can also screenshot these, okay, so that you can get this information. So what a Calvinist is going to do, number 1, doctrine over person. Now, the way we've framed that before is that like the person isn't really there. The ideology of Calvinism is going to override your personal thoughts, feelings, ideas, and sensibilities and capacity for discernment to where you outsource all of that to Calvinism rather than have any of your own. So when I ask James White what he thinks about Hebrews 7:25, I will not get James White's opinion. I will get Calvinism. Nobody knows what James White's opinion is. James White doesn't know what James White's opinion is. He doesn't have one. The personhood is gone. Speaking of the personhood being gone, we don't have it scheduled yet, but Doug Gustafson is going to come back on the channel soon and talk about how Calvinism takes the personhood from people. And that's exactly what it does. You'll notice shifting definitions when you're dealing with people who are trying to manipulate you. You'll notice a bunch of false dichotomies. You'll notice questioning as doubt. Oh, you can't question these things. And like we just had Alana on yesterday, and it was very clear that she was not treated as a full citizen, if you will, when you're questioning the tulip. You're not allowed to do that. You have to be Pinocchio. You're not allowed to turn into a real boy. So Alana and Hector, they were turning into, they were like Pinocchio. They're turning into a real boy. They're escaping the system. They're leaving Pleasure Island, and they're leaving the elephant. Okay, and then they're being treated like they're the problem when they were the only ones doing the right thing. You should be doubting things. There's spiritual elitism. We are better than you. We are the elect. You are not. Guilt by association. Oh, you can't read those books by Richard Rohr or what's some other stuff? Like if you happen to find, what's that woman's name? The woman preacher who's real famous. I forget her name. Or Beth Moore, I think, is another good one. But if you happen to find a woman preacher wrote a book and it is very helpful to you, you're guilty by association. Southern Baptists will put you on the stake, Guilt by association. Some people call this secondary separation. Like they only fellowship with people who are like-minded, and they disfellowship with people who aren't like-minded. That's called an echo chamber, by the way. And then secondary separation is, even though you're like-minded, because you are fellowshipping with someone who isn't like-minded, we will also disfellowship from you. Secondary separation. Joyce Meyer, yeah. And I've always, Joyce Meyer's all this kind of stuff. And then one time I opened up one of her books and read, just in a bookstore, just thumbing through stuff while I was waiting for something. It was in a Christian bookstore, which we're going to do another video on that too. But just thumbing through there, reading some excerpts from her books, I found some of the stuff actually kind of insightful and kind of helpful. Doesn't mean I agree with everything that's in there. But, if you want to read a Joyce Meyer book and you get something out of it, have at it. You're not going to get any flack from me. Gatekeeping salvation. Observe if a leader makes themselves or the specific interpretations gatekeepers of salvation, implying that salvation depends on adherence to their teachings or interpretations. Now, notice it is implying. They do not come out and say that, okay? When I was at Fish River Baptist Church, Pastor Ron Jackson was talking about the youth pastor who was pastor before me, youth pastor before I was, whose name was Scott. And he was telling the story of how he got Scott to believe the doctrines of grace too. And then Scott came to realize that he wasn't saved. And then he finally trusted Christ for real, this kind of thing. Basically, this story came up in multiple various different forms at multiple various different times. And there was very strong and obvious implication that he was implying that I wasn't really saved unless I accepted the doctrines of grace. There's no grace in Calvinism. So then there's isolation. Watch for efforts to isolate followers from outside perspectives, including other Christian traditions, under the guise, and oh, you got to read all these books. Don't read these books. And then they'll even kick people out, and they'll tell you what not to watch. Oh, you better not watch that channel Beyond the Fundamentals. They will, they're dangerous over there. Their control over your personal convictions. Now, Calvin was real bad about this too. One of the reasons, like, a lot of us are wearing wristwatch. You know why we're wearing wristwatches is because Calvin's Geneva would not allow jewelry. And so the reason the Swiss became so well known for making watches is because they still wanted to wear something that looked good and had some bling to it. But the fact that it was a clock on their wrist was what justified it as not being jewelry. And like, oh, okay, I guess we'll allow that. So then, since you couldn't wear jewelry, you could wear wristwatches. So that started that kind of thing, with the controlling everybody's personal convictions. And then moral overburdening. Be aware of tactics that overburden individuals with a sense of moral inadequacy or failure, not living up to the leader's specific theological moral standards, often leading to cycles of guilt and dependence on the leader for their assurance. And see, they need external validation from you because they're narcissistic. And they want to condition you to need external validation from them in order to feel like you're a whole person and in right standing with God. So there is this two-way kind of, they want to have a codependency with you. They want to establish a codependency with you. And that's manipulative as well. And you don't realize that it's happening, but people under these kinds of narcissistic pastors will find themselves eager to gain and maintain the favor of the narcissistic pastors. And that's how they control people. Got this codependency going on. You'll notice selective scripture use. You'll notice that they have unchallengeable authority. You'll notice that there is spiritual gaslighting. Observe, for instance, where your feelings, experiences, or observations are dismissed or are invalidated using religious language, making you doubt your own perceptions or your own spiritual journey. We saw that happen to Debbie and Marcia, sending them around to these emails. Oh, you haven't been to seminary, have you? I guess you just don't know anything. Emphasis on divine mystery. Public shaming. Okay. Exclusivity and salvation. Got to go through them to get it. It's implication. It's subtle. You see, it's subtle. An overemphasis on predestination and sovereignty and that sort of stuff. Simplification of complex issues. I heard a definition of a cult the other day, or a description of how they get started from a lawyer who was featured in one of these cult expose documentaries that me and Paula were watching. Paula and I were watching. And the lawyer said cults are started when people are willing to accept simple answers for complex problems. And I heard that. I'm like, that is exactly right. That's exactly what's going on. If people don't want to spend the cognitive horsepower to really dig into something and to really understand it, I can just give you a bunch of moralistic beliefs to hang on to. Turn it all over on God. And that's what's happening there when people are railing against me because some of my lingo sounds as if it's psychological or something like that. The deal is they don't want to spend the cognitive horsepower to really understand. Now, notice I'm morally framing this. You see that? I said they don't want to. You hear that? I am morally framing this. But they don't want to spend the cognitive horsepower to find out what's really going on, or that seems very daunting. And it's very easy to just offload all of that onto some religious magical thinking. It's very simple. It's very easy. Religious magical thinking is very easy, and I can feel moral for believing and trusting. I just trust in God, brother. I don't need to know all of that psychological stuff. I know. Message me back after your, kids are coming out of jail and getting divorced and everything else, because that's what's coming. Don't you understand? I'm trying to help you guys. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help you avoid the dysfunction that I know is coming your way and that you can't see because you are blind. I'm trying to get you to see more clearly. That's what I'm trying to do. I care about you. I don't want you to make the mistakes that I made. And if you keep down this path of pushing off things that seem complicated and difficult because you feel more moral and superior for putting it all on God, and it's simpler that way. Yeah, it's simpler until it's not. And one day it's going to be so complex, you're not going to know what to do about it, and you're going to be buried in problems up to your eyeballs, for which you're not going to have any kind of solution for them. Alana just said that she morally framed something in our interview last night. I caught myself as I listened back today. Yeah, and so it's so subtle. We'll notice ourselves doing it without even realizing that we're doing it. Reliance on charismatic persuasion. Oh, it came from John MacArthur, and he's just so holy and wonderful. Observe if the leader relies more on their personal charisma or emotional appeal rather than scripture, reasoning on the testimony of the broader Christian community throughout history. So you can look at people like James White. He says things loudly and forcefully, which causes a bunch of Calvinists who want some kind of champion to glom onto him, right? That doesn't make him right at all. There's nobody with a high epistemic threshold of proof will spend more than 10 seconds listening to somebody with James White. You can tell he's full of beans quickly when you start listening to him. And then alienation from the church is what happens. It's funny. You say all these things all lined up like this. I asked ChatGPT. I did. I plugged all this information in there. I said, based on what we have talked about and what we know, give me a 10 ways that Calvinists will use moralistic manipulation. And now give me 10 more. And the ChatGPT knows Calvinists do this.